Hi, my name is Ken Schwartz, and today I'm going to be introducing the 1000 grit Nubatama Ume series stone. So you can see that's the Nubatama, the Ume symbol, or plum symbol, either way, and the 1000 grit. There is a second Ume 1000 grit, which is the smaller stone. I've done this video earlier on. It's this particular stone. So I guess we can call that the small ume and the large ume, just to distinguish the two. So this is a sort of full-size brick. We're going to give it a try and see what we think of it. So I suspect it too will be somewhat porous, and we can do a quick test with the sprayer. And it is. So we're going to run a little water on this and see how things work out. Again, still fairly quick, so it'll probably take a minute or so to give it a little bit more of a soak. While it's soaking, I'll make mention of a couple knives that I'm going to try on it. This is a Kikuichi knife. I believe it's a white steel, so you can see that the bevel is somewhat uneven looking, and there's a particular area over here that's a bit low, so we're going to work it on this stone and see how that goes. Then we're going to work with this knife. It's a Maestro and bring it up to 1000 grit edge. And then finally we're going to do this, which is a Sugimoto. Not Sugimoto, but Sugimoto, as Mrs. Sugimoto corrected me on. And Tsukiji, where I picked the knife up at the time. It's a short little cleaver, kind of the size of an Ikari, but a little heavier blade. So we're going to put a bit more of an edge on that. And so let's get going here and see how we are with this. Okay, so it seems like it's holding its water pretty well here. So let's start out with this knife and see what we think. Okay, so pretty smooth, looking good. A little too early to tell. Darker stones in general, whether they're synthetics or natural stones, it's a little harder to see swarf buildup on these. It can be a bit misleading. So let's not assume that we're not getting metal coming off of it. And let's see where we are on this. So okay, it's looking pretty good so far. So let's keep going a bit. Nice, consistent, smooth sensation, but you definitely do get the sense that there is some wearing occurring. It's not like a 60 grit sort of stone, but for a 1000 grit stone, it appears to be fairly aggressive. Of course, it's always worth mentioning that when you look at these single bevels, you're abrading a much larger surface area than your double beveled knives. So it is a slower process, but it does give you a chance to see the finish much more accurately just because it's a bigger area to look at. Nice smooth sensation for 1000 grit. I'll let you listen to it a little bit without me talking. Alright, so there's a slight amount of mud, not a lot. It's not a very muddy stone for 1000 grit, but it does produce some mud. I actually kind of like the amount of mud that it produces. And you can see now it's just a little bit dry, so we'll let it drip for a little bit here. There we go. Okay, so while we're doing this, I'll mention that when you sharpen, if you're doing a number of grits, it's nice to keep a fairly consistent angle when you're doing it more or less sectionally, because this way you can see the directionality of the scratches. And what that does is when you do a subsequent stone and you do it at a slightly different angle, you can see which stone to attribute which scratches to a little bit more easily. Just a handy thing to notice. So, coming along very nice. Does seem to preserve the contrast that's still there pretty well. Let's rinse it off and see what we've got here. Okay, so what's interesting to see is that it's a somewhat hazy finish. It is preserving some contrast between the softer cladding and the coarse steel. That area that I mentioned over here is pretty well gone, so it's an aggressive little fella. Let's do it a little bit more. I'm really getting to like this stone. And that sure didn't take too long, did it? Again, I'll emphasize that you put your pressure along the very edge of the blade so that you don't mess up this part by keeping that pressure down there. There's always been a lot of controversy as far as the very tip of the blade area and the angle that you sharpen at, and trying to make that a more acute angle. I find this very unnecessary. On my trips to Japan, when I ask people about it, varying opinions, just like over here. Yeah, so okay, I'm getting a little bit of the mud, and there's a smoothness to the mud, which is very nice. You know, a little bit of mud is a good thing sometimes for getting into areas that aren't quite perfectly flat. This is particularly useful for people who do freehand sharpening. You can see when I spread the mud out just a little bit. Okay, at this point the stone is pretty well saturated, so we can switch, instead of the big sprays, just a little squirt every now and then, just to kind of keep things going. Not quite as hard as the little Ume 1000, but very useful, enjoyable mud to work with. Particularly nice for a single bevel knife. I think you would certainly enjoy this. Very nice indeed. I tend to like to put my mud back on from the knife. So just a brief touch on the back. Primarily the back, you want to do just a minimum amount of deburring. Not a whole lot. If you're unfamiliar with the Japanese knives, they have a hollow back to it. And so this depression in the hollow back, this area in here called an ura, you're really grinding right on the edge here and right along the spine. And this part doesn't get touched. Okay, very nice. Let's go on to the other two knives. Rinse this off real quick. Okay, so what we see is a markedly improved consistency on the softer cladding. Not a very shiny finish, more of a natural haze looking type of finish on the core or harder steel. I like the effect. It's very nice. Let's move on. So now let's take a look at this white steel short cleaver, I guess you'd call it. Mini chukabocho, whatever you might want to call it. So let's get an angle, and right about there seems good. Yeah. This knife is a very nice knife for a home user. It's a short little cleaver. It's heavier than a carry, so it has a little more versatility in terms of handling harder, tougher things to cut than a carry, which I like to reserve for doing my most delicate vegetable work. Handy little knife. Okay, so let's spread the mud a little, give it a little squirt. That ought to keep it wet for a bit. So this stone saturates fairly quickly, which is good. So not quite a splash and go, but a couple minutes soaking and you're good to go. Okay, let's flip it over. So not as muddy as the 1500 stone, the 1500 Ume. It's not as muddy as a number of other stones. You know, maybe the king stone might be a bit muddier. It's not as muddy as some of the natural aodos. I would rate it like a medium to hard natural aodo by comparison. Not a soft aodo. There are varying hardnesses of natural aodos. So now I'm using the mud, letting it dry just a little bit. This gives us a little more density. Okay, let's see. Let's bring a little of the mud back onto the stone. Be careful when you do that particular move. Again, all of these stones are available at Chef Knives to Go. You can look in the Ken's Corner section under both the Nubatama Umes as well as the Nubatama Bamboo series stones. All right, let's take a quick look at the kind of edge we've got here. Toothy edges tend to cut paper towel pretty well. Okay, and so that certainly does have some tooth to it. If we look at how well it handles a sheet of paper, let's see. Okay, slice cut's not a problem whatsoever. Push cut, pretty good push cutter. Not the type of push cut you'd get with an extremely high grit stone, but still quite respectable. And feel this is a good sort of everyday working edge. Certainly an excellent stone to use to think of in terms of its being a preparatory stone for finer grit stones when you're bringing an edge up. Since it's so thick, it represents a particularly good value. Okay, let's go a little further, and we'll do one more knife, just the Maestro Ume, and let's see how we go from here. Okay, again, this is a pleasurable stone to work. I can see this stone being an excellent choice for a lot of your typical sushi bar type environments, or as a house stone for a number of people to be using. There's no problem with it in terms of its softness, in terms of doing an edge leading stroke and having it cut into the stone. So it's a robust stone that you can get people who don't have great angle control to use this. And all right, let's see how this edge looks. Okay. Easily cuts. Let's see how it's slice cuts. Very nice. Push cuts very nice. Very nice. I like it. I think we have another winner. Again, thank you for your time, patience, watching me go through 3 knives. Hope you enjoyed the video, and feel free to comment on it. Preferably something appropriate and useful.